Welcome to the Regular Catholic Guy Show with your host, Jeff Garrett, a podcast for regular Catholic men who want to get into the trenches to learn about their Catholic faith, marriage, raising kids, and other Catholic guy stuff. Enjoy the show.
Father Jeff, happy Advent.
Happy Advent to you too.
It's not the most wonderful time of the year, but it's right up there for sure.
Other than the weather, it's a great time of year.
Well, yeah, there's that. Even the weather. It gets cold and we get snow and ice and all that kind of thing, but that's good for the world because we need the subsoil moisture. Just ask any farmer.
We definitely need some moisture.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. So we're praying for a good snow cover this year.
Well, we have a topic that I'm pretty familiar with, at least for the last 35 years.
Well, gee, what might that be?
Marriage.
Oh, sorry. Anytime you can work in a Princess Bride reference, I feel it's important.
So I'm going to shoot right into the questions, Father.
Okay.
What do couples need to do if they want to get married in the Catholic Church?
Well, step one, obviously, is to meet and fall in love.
That's step one.
That'd be step one. Now, the hows and the what you do in the process and all that kind of thing. Some of this is going to depend on what your diocese is, because different dioceses have different regulations as far as what marriage prep is and so on and so forth. But the first thing that you need, and this is going to be no matter where you get married, you have to have what's called capacity to get married. Okay? If I, for example, were to present myself before a priest and say, I want to get married, that one would get shot down right away. I don't have the capacity for it because I made a promise of celibacy to the Archbishop when I got ordained. One of the first questions that you ask in the marriage preparation process is, are you free to get married? And I wouldn't be. So first thing you have to have is capacity. Now, that means that you're not married and that you either have never been married, or if you were married before, your former spouse is deceased, or if you got a divorce, then your marriage has also been annulled by the church. We can talk about what that means a little bit later. For right now, let's just say that that's what needs to happen. You need to be free to get married. So does your fiance. Okay? So first thing you have to do is make sure that you're actually eligible to marry. Okay. Then you go and you talk to the priest or whoever it is in your parish who starts off the marriage preparation process, and they'll kind of guide you from there. I'll tell you what we do in the Archdiocese of Omaha. If you're not in the Archdiocese of Omaha, the details are going to be a little bit different, but it's basically going to be the same thing. Pardon me. In the Archdiocese of Omaha, we have the couples do what's called the focus. Focus is a questionnaire. It's 150, 160 some odd. It's not really questions, it's statements. And then each one of the two says, yes, I agree with that statement. No, I disagree. Or, well, I'm not sure. And the idea is you compare the answers, and hopefully that will raise issues that it's important that the couple talks about before they get married rather than afterwards. Okay? So you do that. Plus, you'll have to do the marriage paperwork. Now, this in the Archdiocese of Omaha, that consists of the prenuptial questionnaire, and that's just all the factual information: your name, your birth date, your sacramental records, your parents' names, your declaration of your intent to marry, and things like that. Plus, you'll have to establish that you are free to get married, either because the priest knows you personally or because somebody who does know you personally comes and testifies to the fact that you're actually free to get married. In all of this, you have to have the right intention, meaning that you intend to establish a marriage that fits the church's definition of marriage. And that means that you are intending that your marriage will be lifelong, that you're going into it without thinking divorce is even an option. Okay? that this is the person who either they're going to be in the grieving spouse seat at your funeral or you're going to be in the grieving spouse seat at their funeral. Okay. So you have to have the intentions of your marriage will be lifelong, faithful, which means exactly what it sounds like, that you're not going to have somebody else on the side or anything like that, that you're going to be true to the vows that you're going to make. And if appropriate, if the couple is of a young enough age and things like that, you have to be open to the possibility of having children. Okay? If you come in and say, well, we're going to get married, but we're not going to have children, your priest is going to say, well, if you're going to get married, it's not going to be in the Catholic Church. Okay? So you have to have those three intentions going in, or else you're not going to be getting married in the church. And then after that, it's just a question of slowly but surely over the course of the years growing into a relationship. Now, Jeff, you've been married 35 years, and I will guarantee you that today you can look back 35 years ago and say, who was Donna anyway? I know her so much better now than I did then.
Absolutely.
And, she'll probably say the same about you. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Otherwise, you'd have gotten bored 34 years ago, And so it's a question of gradually growing into the relationship. There's no such thing as a couple that's got the whole thing figured out. There's no such thing as a perfect marriage. What's the cliche? It's not a perfect marriage. It's two imperfect people trying to love each other. Well, that's what you need.
Yeah, one quick question for you there. Mm-hmm. What if you know going into the marriage that you can't have children?
That's different. Can't have children and won't have children are two very different things. Okay. The question is a question of your willingness, your openness to it. So if you've got, say, a man who is sterile for whatever reason, that he can, how should we put this for any young ears who might be listening, perform the marital act, but that he is incapable of getting his wife pregnant. That's not his choice. Okay. And so that does not impede you from being able to get married. What would impede you from being able to get married is coming in and say, well, we're just never going to have kids. We could, but we've decided not to. Mm-hmm. So there's a very different thing between saying I can't have kids and I refuse to have kids. I can't have kids. That's a physical defect, a tragedy, whatever you want to call it. I won't have kids is a problem of the will.
Is there a period of time that you have to wait from the time that you're engaged to the time you actually get married?
Thank you. Yes, I meant to mention that earlier. In the Archdiocese of Omaha, it's 6 months. And that's from not the time you get engaged, that's from the first time you make contact with the priest. Okay? Until the wedding day. Is a minimum of 6 months. We recommend longer. I personally think that couples ought to be engaged for at least a year before the wedding day. Now, does that mean I've never done a wedding where they were engaged less time than that? Of course it doesn't mean that. I've done several. But those couples basically had to convince me that they weren't rushing into it. And as far as I know, they're all still married. So I usually don't get the divorce notifications. But it's 6 months in this diocese. Other dioceses might have different policies. So if you have a question on that, check with your local parish. A lot of times it'll even be printed right there in the bulletin. If you want to get married, you must contact the pastor 6 months before the wedding date or whatever. And again, recommend that it be longer than that too.
Well, we're seeing so many young people that aren't getting married in the church.
Or not getting married at all.
Yeah, or just living together.
Right.
Why should people get married in the church?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, marriage, by its very nature, is from God. Okay? God created man and woman, and he created them to be together in a lifelong partnership and all this kind of a thing. It's written right there into the natural law. And so it just makes a certain amount of sense from that standpoint, not to sit there and say, well, I own this relationship. It's mine. It's yours. It's ours. And we'll do with it whatever we want. But rather to humbly say, you know what? This wasn't our idea. And so we are going to need God's help in order to make this work, which leads me to the second consideration for it. Reason to get married in the church is the grace that you receive by the sacrament. Folks, that is a real thing. Okay? Many times people just like, well, we'll just live together. It's no different than being married. You want to bet? You show me where in the idea of looking at each other and going, well, let's just live together, there's any guarantee that God will give his grace to you to be able to make it work. Okay? You don't have that. Whereas in the sacrament of marriage, God has bound himself to pouring out the grace on the couple. Okay? And so by not getting married in the church, you are depriving yourself of a wonderful source of the help that you're going to need to do something which is humanly very, very, very difficult. To make a marriage work, and Jeff, you can give me 35 years worth of experience in telling me it's not easy sometimes.
Sometimes it's not.
Sometimes it's not. And
sometimes it is.
Sometimes it is. Sometimes it definitely is. And, when I talk about this at weddings and things like that, I'll look at the couple and I'll say, some days it's not going to be easy. And I can look out the congregation and see, I can tell who the married couples are. They're the ones looking at each other going, boy, does he know how right he is or what? You can't make it work without the help of God. That's another thing. Marriage is not between two people, it's between two people and God. So if that's going to be the case, why not bring him into it? Third of all, and this sounds flippant, but it's really not. Catholic wedding ceremonies are incredible. You don't want to deprive yourself of this. And you don't want to try to own it yourself by saying, well, I'm going to write my own vows. Like, no. Again, you don't own this thing. And to have a Catholic wedding ceremony is in and of itself a beautiful thing. We rock when it comes to weddings. I just don't know a nicer way to say that. You get all these people who go to a Catholic wedding ceremony. It's like, oh my, you're in church for 45 minutes to an hour just for a wedding? It's like, no. We take it a little more seriously. We couldn't do this in 10 minutes. That's just ridiculous. So there's that. Plus, and this actually is tied into this previous point, the idea of getting married in the church itself is a statement. And that is that my marriage, your marriage, our marriage, however you're going to put it, it's part of a larger reality. And that larger reality is that you as a couple are members of the body of Christ. And as a couple, you are united to each other as a member of the body of Christ. Okay? So it situates you within the church's mission of going out and evangelizing the world. And this is something that you got to understand. Your marriage is part of God's plan to fix everything that's wrong in the world. Because the answer to everything that's wrong in the world is the love of Christ. And this is the sacramentality of marriage. You as a couple show that love to the world by the way you live out your love for each other. And that has to start right from the root of the marriage, which is the wedding ceremony. And then it plays out day by day by day. You can't have the plant without the root. The root is the wedding. And then the plant is the marriage that's lived. Okay? So if you are going to accept God's call to go out and be the living icon of Christ's love in the world, then you got to start it out right by coming before his altar in his house and asking his grace to make it work.
What if you've been married outside the church, Father?
Well, if you've been married outside the church and you're a Catholic, okay, we'll do the bad news first and then the good news. Okay? And I don't know a way to sugarcoat this, and I've never been good at sugarcoating things to begin with.
That's for sure.
Well, I actually take that as a compliment. But as Catholics, we are bound to follow not just the laws of God, but also the laws of the church. The laws of the church are not optional just because they're not divine law. One of the laws of the church is that a Catholic has to get married in a Catholic church by a Catholic minister according to the Catholic ritual. Okay? Now, can that rule be waived? Yes, it can. We can talk about that here in just a second. But if you deliberately choose not to get married in the church and you don't get permission from the church and get the rule waived and all that kind of thing, which is called a dispensation from form. If you don't get that dispensation from form, you have committed and are day by day living in a situation of grave sin. Okay, this is serious stuff. This is not just, well, I stubbed my toe and said a naughty word. Okay, this is, I've taken one of God's sacraments and I have twisted it for my own purposes. Okay? And so if you are married outside the church, you have placed yourself outside of the communion of the church. And what that means in practical terms is you should not be presenting yourself for the sacrament of the Eucharistic Mass. Okay? That's the bad news. Now, the good news is that for people who are contemplating the idea of getting married outside the church, say you're marrying a non-Catholic and they want to get married in their church or something like that, it is possible to get permission from the church to get married in a non-Catholic ceremony. I've helped couples with this many times. It's really not as complicated as you might think it is. All you have to do is go through marriage preparation just like you would as if you were getting married in the church. And at the end of it, the priest sends a petition into the diocese saying, hey, let nice Catholic person marry nice non-Catholic person in non-Catholic person's church or whatever it is. And here are the reasons for it. And let me tell you, I've never had one of those denied. I've never had the archdiocese write back and say, sorry, they have to get married in the Catholic church or they're not getting married, period. So when you're thinking about getting married and you're thinking, well, either I get married in the church or I get married outside the church, it's possible to do a both and. Okay. Now, if you have gotten married outside the church, it is possible to have your marriage what's called validated in the church. Now, a lot of people use the term having your marriage blessed. It's not exactly a blessing. Okay. When we say it's a validation, meaning it's possible to take this marriage that was done outside the rules of the church and bring it inside the rules of the church. And that simply means that you go through whatever period of preparation is going to be required of you, and then you re-exchange your vows. Now, if neither of you has ever been married before, or if the former spouse is dead or anything like that, then it's easy. Then you just come in, you say, Father, I want to get my marriage validated. We'll put you through the thing. No additional paperwork needs to be done in terms of an annulment or anything like that. And you simply re-exchange your vows. And then you're married validly in the church. You can come back to go into communion, assuming, of course, that you go to confession, which the priest should offer that to you in the process of getting your marriage validated. And everything is all hat and horns. Okay? Now, if, and this is probably more frequently the case, if one or the other or both spouses have a previous marriage and the former spouse is still alive, that's when things get dicey. Okay? The church presumes, as a matter of law, the church presumes that marriages are valid until proven otherwise. That goes for Catholic marriages. That goes for non-Catholic marriages. So Lutheran marries a Methodist or something like that. The Catholic Church looks at that and goes, yeah, it's a marriage. Until you can prove to me that it's not. Okay? So if there is a previous marriage on the part of one or both, then what they need to do before they can even start thinking about getting the marriage validated is to establish that they are actually free to get married. Because, well, let's take a couple of names to make it a little more concrete. Let's say John and Jane get married, okay, and 5 years later they get a divorce. Okay? And then 2 years after that, John meets Sally, and he wants to marry her. There's a problem. And that is that maybe in the eyes of the state of Nebraska or the state of wherever you live, John and Jane are no longer married. But in the eyes of the church and in the eyes of God, they still are. See what I'm saying? And so John is going to have to prove by the process called an annulment. He's going to have to prove that his marriage to Jane was missing something essential for it to be a real marriage. Okay? Could be any number of things. We'll talk about that here in just a second. But in order for John to get married to Sally in the church, he's going to have to get his marriage to Jane annulled. Have that investigated and have the church say, oh, you know what? There was something missing there. That was never a valid marriage from the start. Whatever it was not a valid sacramental marriage. Okay? Now, so let's say that John and Sally already went ahead and got married by a justice of the peace or something like that. And then John wants to return to the practice of his faith. In order to do that, he's going to have to get his marriage to Sally validated. And in order to do that, he's going to have to get his first marriage, the marriage to Jane, he's going to have to get that one annulled. Okay, now, I will say this. I quite frankly would not wish the annulment process on my worst enemy. Okay, maybe my worst enemy, but number 2 is safe. Anyway, no, it's a painful process because you're reopening a bunch of old wounds that you kind of wish were closed for good, and especially if the divorce was a particularly ugly one or a messy one, because both spouses have the opportunity to participate. And I mean, you can't just do the annulment process and only inform one of the spouses. The other one has to have his or her chance to say their side of things. And it can be ugly. It really can. But it can also be very worth it. Okay? Because if you get the marriage annulled, then you know you're no longer bound to it. Okay? So, back to John and Jane and Sally. So John and Sally come into my office and say, Father, we want to get married in the church. We've been married outside the church for 5 years or whatever it is, and we want to get this straightened out. We want to get it rectified. I say, okay, why'd you get married outside the church? Well, John says, I was married once before. I say, okay, here we go. And then we have to investigate the circumstances and have to submit evidence to the marriage tribunal of the Archdiocese of Omaha and things like that. And due to the volume of cases that they get and the sad lack of qualified canon lawyers in our diocese, and this is actually in most dioceses, because I mean, to be a canon lawyer takes a particular charism. It's not something that all of us have. I certainly don't have it. The most important thing I learned in my canon law classes in the seminary was to make sure I had the number of the chancery memorized. That's almost not an exaggeration. But due to the lack of trained canon and qualified canon lawyers to sit on the tribunal and judge the cases and all kind of thing, and due to the volume of cases that they get, the average time of an annulment from time you first submit your paperwork to the time of the final disposition of the case in this diocese in Omaha is around 1.5 years to 2 years. And it's getting to be closer to 2 years. Other dioceses, it might be different. But it's what has to be done, because the church takes seriously Jesus' words where he says, what God has joined together, man must not separate. So if there is a valid marriage, if John and Jane were married validly, then it's not that the church won't grant their annulment. It's that the church can't grant their annulment. No power on earth can dissolve a valid sacramental marriage. And if John and Jane were in one, I don't care what court said you're divorced, you're still married. Okay? If, on the other hand, there was grounds for the annulment, something essential was missing, and then the church comes back and says, all right, John, we hereby we've investigated and we hereby have judged that, something essential was missing. So we declare your marriage to Jane to be null and void, and you are free to get married in the church. Then, assuming Sally didn't have any previous marriages, then John and Sally can re-exchange their vows and validate their marriage and all that kind of thing. It's not a fun process, but if it comes out with a positive, an affirmative response, say, yes, we declare your marriage, your first marriage null and void, then that you see then where it's worth it, because you didn't take it into your own hands. You did it according to the church and all that kind of thing. So is it easy? No. Is it fun? No. And I'm sure there's folks out there listening who have been through this process. You know how not fun it was. You know how painful it can be. Now, there are some annulments. I'll say this. There are some annulments that are relatively quick and painless and easy. Like, for example, let's say that John and Jane hadn't gotten married in the church in the first place. They're both their first marriages, and they got married by Judge Smith or whoever. Okay. So then they get divorced, and John meets Sally, wants to marry her, comes in and said, or they do get married outside the church, and then they want to get married in the church. So John and Sally come into my office and say, we want to get married in the church, but John was married once before. I'll say, all right, John, tell me about your first marriage. Well, it's to Jane and blah, blah, blah. I'll say, where'd you get married? Well, down at the courthouse. It's like, oh, you just made life so much easier. Because now all you have to do is prove that you didn't get married in the Catholic Church. And that's just a matter of documents. That's just a matter of, here's a copy of my baptismal certificate. That proves that I'm Catholic. Here's a copy of my marriage license. That proves I got married outside the church. Here's a copy of my divorce decree. That proves that we got divorced. And here's my petition saying, please declare this marriage null and void. And it's easy. Those guys come back within a matter of weeks, months. The most unusual one I ever had, I sent it in on Monday and I got it back on Thursday. Now, I've never had been that quick ever again, but still. So there are some annulments, like if it's a defective form, where it's relatively simple like that. But most of them are not easy. But it has to be done because we take seriously the idea, if it truly is a marriage, we can't mess with that.
What if you can't get the annulment?
Ouch. Yeah. And I've had this happen. If you can't get the annulment, then you're not free to get married in the church. You are married until, well, as you said in your vows, till death do us part. All the days of my life, all the days of your life. And when you made that vow, that was not a temporary thing. That was, well, we expected you meant what you said. So if you can't get the annulment, well, a couple of things on that. Obviously, if you can't get the annulment, you can't get married in the church. If you can't get the annulment, you shouldn't even be dating. Just think about it. You'd be a married man dating somebody, or a married woman dating somebody. And that's how the church sees you. And that's what you are in the eyes of God. Now, maybe your first marriage ended ugly. Maybe there was some issues there that make you go, there's no way that I could possibly be held to that marriage. I understand that, and I empathize with you, sympathize with you. But at the same time, remember that we're talking about whether or not this was an actual valid sacramental marriage. Now, if there was abuse there or something like that, a lot of times, if it's an abusive relationship, that is a symptom of the fact that there's something missing in the relationship from the start. And so something like that could easily be something that leads us to find out what the grounds for annulment might be. Okay. That having been said, remember, marriage shows the love of Christ for the world. The love of Christ looks like a cross. It hurts. It hurts, and I don't apologize for my language because I mean it literally. It hurts literally like hell. the hell of the damned. That's what it hurts like. That can be tough. Now, if it's an abusive situation, something like that, yeah, get out of there. But just realize you're still married. And if you can't get the annulment, then your options are either go back to the person, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend, or live as a single person. Just realizing that in the eyes of God and the eyes of the church, you're married to somebody who may not have been worthy of it, but you're still married to. Find yourself a good canon lawyer or a good sympathetic priest who understands the annulment process, things like that. Tell him your story. There may well be grounds for the annulment that you haven't thought of. Okay. One other thing. This is something that some folks don't quite know. Not all marriage tribunals are created equal. There are good ones and there are bad ones. Okay. The reason I mentioned this is that if you need an annulment as a Catholic by canon law, you have the right to petition for the annulment in any one of 3 dioceses. Okay? The first one is the diocese where you currently live. The second one is the diocese where you were married, if that's different. And the third one is in the diocese where you were baptized. Okay? So, let's go back to John and Jane. Let's say John was baptized in Minneapolis, St. Paul, that he and Jane were married in Des Moines, and that he and Jane, or he or Jane, now live in Omaha. Okay? You would have the right to petition for the annulment in any one of those 3 dioceses. And so, again, not all marriage tribunals are created equal. If you didn't get the annulment in one diocese, and I hate to make it sound like you're diocese shopping, but you have the right to have your case heard properly and all kinds of things. You can also petition in different dioceses too. I had a fellow one time who he kept petitioning for an annulment, and he had it denied. And just from listening to his story, I'm sitting there going, "You sound to me like you've got a case." And I found out he had been baptized in a different diocese. Well, he couldn't petition in Omaha again because Omaha had already denied him. And quite frankly, part of the problem was he didn't write his petition with an eye toward what the church looks for. He wrote it fine. It just wasn't a good annulment petition. But, the case had already been judged, and so it was pretty well over. I said, petition the other diocese. Petition one place where you were baptized. So he petitioned there. And this time he got some help in writing his petition. And it got granted. And he was able to get his current marriage validated. So that's an option as well.
Prenuptial agreements have become popular. How's the church view prenuptial agreements, Father?
Well, it depends on what the terms of the prenuptial agreement are. Okay, let's take a situation where you've got a 60-year-old man marrying a 60-year-old woman. Okay, each one of them has family. They were both married before, and their spouses are deceased, and so they get married in the church and all that kind of a thing. But they sign a prenup that says, all right, when we die, my kids get this property, and your kids get your property, and we're not going to have any mixing. Okay, that's acceptable. There's nothing wrong with that in the eyes of the church. Okay. The problem with a prenuptial agreement are the ones that say, if we get divorced, as soon as you say those fatal words, you just invalidated your marriage. Okay. Remember, one of the prerequisites for marriage is that you have the proper intention, and one of the intention is permanence. That this marriage will be till death do us part. And if you're sitting going, well, yeah, this marriage is going to be till death do us part. But of course, if we get divorced, okay, you just contradicted the first one. And you cannot sit there and say, well, I can intend that my marriage is going to be until death do us part, but I'm going to be realistic about it. and say, but if we get divorced, no. The type of vow that you're going to be making does not admit for the possibility of if we get divorced. Okay. You need to go into the marriage with the idea, if this isn't working, we will make it work. Okay? We'll do whatever we have to. And if it's truly not going to work, then why get married in the first place? If you see the issues that make you doubt whether or not you can make this work, not just the normal everyday, well, I can't know the future, all that kind of thing. We all have those. I had those the day I got ordained a priest. I'm sure you had them before you got married. How am I going to make this work? And all that kind of thing. But something that makes you go, oh man, because of this and this specific issue, I doubt that this is going to work. Then don't get married. Okay. I had a couple one time, and I have a lot of respect for this couple. They broke it off with like a month to go before the wedding, because they finally came to the realization, hey, this isn't going to work. And through the process of marriage prep, they'd come to that realization. And so I think the invitations were already out, and it was embarrassing to them, but they made the right call. And I told them at the time, and I still believe this 20 some odd years later, they did absolutely the right thing. So if you see that coming, don't get married. Just don't. It's not worth it.
What else would you like to share in regards to marriage, Father?
It's such an important and serious step. The Engaged Encounter community has the slogan, wedding is a day, and marriage is a lifetime. This is the thing we have to understand. We have to take this very seriously. You don't just get married because of the romanticized, idealized, oh, this is going to be wonderful type of a thing. Oh yeah, we might squabble every once in a while, but oh no, that's not what it's going to be. Marriage is hard work, and it's going to be the hardest work you ever did in your life. Is it worth it? Well, Jeff, you've been married 35 years. You tell me.
Absolutely.
Did you hear that, Donna? Anyway.
4 wonderful children, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, but, you're a great example of the fact that it's a wonderful thing in the midst of some real struggles, which you've had, which all good couples have had. But when you're making that decision to get married, don't make it frivolously. Don't make it for any other reason than you feel called by God. And this is, I think, the step that a lot of people lose out on. You feel called by God to marry this particular person. Okay? So many times people go through this is what I'm looking for in a spouse thing. These looks and this kind of money and this kind of a job and this goals and values and all that kind of a thing. And then, you kind of look to a dating service. Okay, tick as many of these boxes as you can. The only box you need to tick when it comes to finding the person you are to marry is this the one God has called me to? Now, that's a lot harder question to discern, but it's also the only one that's going to lead you to the path that you need. Okay. Now, a lot of the signs of that are going to be, similar values and this and that and whatever. But what you're looking for is that one who, when you imagine being married to them, you feel a sense of peace. Okay. Not that you feel, as one of my brides once described herself, and I told her it was a wonderful word, not that you feel all Twitter-pated. I love the word Twitter-pated. But that the idea, I will spend the rest of my life with you, gives you that sense of peace. Look for that. Pray for that. Pray for your future spouse, even before you meet them, boys and girls. And keep praying for them all the days of your married life.
one other thing tied to that piece, Father, when I'm talking to young couples, young men in particular, when they're discerning getting married to somebody, is, does she make you a better version of yourself? And do you make her a better version of herself?
That's a great question to ask. And that's a great question to ask yourself when you're dating somebody. Does this person make you better or worse? And do you make them better or worse? And if you don't make them better, is that because of something that you could be doing that you're not? Or is that just because you're not? And if you can't answer that question, yeah, I make her better, I make him better. And he makes me better, she makes me better. If you can't answer those questions with a yes, for God's sakes, don't schedule a wedding and look seriously at breaking up. Because part of the responsibility of a married couple is to help each other get to heaven. And
Absolutely.
if you can't do that, then your marriage is going to be on the wrong track from the start.
Thank you, Father.
Well, thanks, Jeff.
You have just listened to the Regular Catholic Guy Show. If you enjoyed the show, share it with your friends. Take a screenshot and share it on Instagram and tag us, Regular Catholic Guy Show. Go to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. This will help more people be able to know about the show and learn about the Catholic faith. Until the next episode, may the road rise up to meet you, may the wind always be at your back, may the sun shine warm upon your face, and rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. God bless.